Welcome back, Matt.
How's it going, Joe?
Good, man. Good. How was the East Coast?
It was interesting. Power outages, internet outages, and then flew back super early this morning. So I'm feeling a bit exhausted and jet lagged, but we'll get back to normal in a couple of days. So
Oh man, yeah. And I guess your sounds like your MacBook Pro is fried too.
yeah. So that's interesting. That's going to be fun to work on. I hope
Wow.
I hope one of these reset tricks works, and if not, hopefully Apple can fix it pretty quickly.
I hope so. It's a
So.
brand new computer. That's a bummer.
Yeah, and it doesn't matter how new it is or how old. If it's a computer you rely on for work, it's very painful if it's out of commission.
Painful
So
indeed.
I
Indeed.
might have to switch over to a Dell I have up in Salt Lake. So we'll see. That could be if it comes to that. Then
If it comes to it,
yeah,
it comes to it, I guess. So
exactly. Yeah.
cool. Well,
So yeah, tell me
yeah.
more about this LinkedIn post. I read through it briefly, but kind of what stimulated those thoughts. This idea of
Yeah, let me
simplicity
share
in
that. Yeah,
data.
there's something I just noticed last night. As I was thinking about it last night, where a lot of the posts I've been seeing on LinkedIn recently, I would say for the past couple months, it seems like there's a trend more towards simplicity and data science. And
Hmm.
by this, I mean things like SQL and Excel and statistics and no or low code tools. Things that I think back, even a few years ago would have been considered like heresy or like
Yeah.
forbidden topics, right? Like you mentioned Excel and people just sort of puke in their mouth, at least data scientists would. Now
Yeah.
I think that there's, I think a bit more acceptance. And so it's a question that, I wouldn't say a question, but really an observation that I've had for a bit, and it very well could be this is a self-selecting observation as well, because the LinkedIn algorithm could very well just be surfacing more of these types of posts, and hence I engage with these posts, and hence I see more of them. This could very well be a filter bubble, but nonetheless, I would say even if it is a filter bubble, the amount of response that I see on these types of posts from people like Eric Weber or Dave Langer, for example, both of whom I think take a very simplistic approach in a good way towards data science, Excel and SQL and getting back to basics. Like the responses I see on those tend to be, they're in such a quantity and a frequency that it does make me wonder if there isn't a bigger trend going on, because it's something that, again, like I just hadn't seen more a kind of a back to basics mentality before in data science. For the longest time, it was more the opposite. Like, I want to use deep learning on everything. Like, even if I'm just summing two numbers together, let's use deep learning for that too.
Well, let's
Because
use
why the hell
TensorFlow, right?
not?
You can add two numbers in TensorFlow. Why not? And you can stick it on your resume, and it looks awesome.
Right. So,
Yeah.
so yeah, I mean,
Well,
there's definitely, I don't know. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I mean, the thing is, I think you can have simplification while things also get a lot more powerful. So I think most of the people we talk to agree that the term big data is kind of passé now. But part of the reason it's passé is that it's just an out-of-the-box feature. Like if you sign up for virtually any cloud data warehouse now, it handles what we used to call big data, and you can do quite a bit with SQL, and then you can do a lot more with extensions that are available that do some basic machine learning and data science on top of that mass scale data. And so I think that's what we're seeing. I mean, I think if you were to look at big data, 8 years ago, you had to buy yourself a big Hadoop cluster. And then even then, you were going to hit its limits eventually. Like you were going to hit the wall on the throughput on that Hadoop cluster. And now I can just go spin up Snowflake or BigQuery and have that capability out of the box in just a few minutes. And I can really focus on my data at a higher level. Like I don't have to worry about coding in Java because most of what I was doing with MapReduce back then could be reduced to SQL in one of these modern data warehouses.
Yeah, I think, yeah, if you definitely harken back to 8 years ago, it was, I mean,
Yeah,
I think the even the cloud tools back then were still pretty primitive. It was a pre-Spark days. So I
yes,
mean, you had Hive, I
yeah,
think, which could do a lot of the SQL stuff, and
yeah.
same with Dremel, which I guess is now BigQuery, but or it was based on it. But yeah, Yeah, I mean, he had like MapReduce or Pig, and it definitely seemed like back in the day, if you're just talking data processing, for example, it was more of a,
Right.
kind of a pissing match to see, oh, well, like how complicated can you make your data processing?
Right.
Right. And we're talking like, what was, it's one thing I would say if you're dealing like with a ton of data, and these were the tools you had at your disposal. That was one class of the types of problems
Yeah.
that were, I think, prevalent back then, and that legitimately you would be applauded even today for your decisions to use things like MapReduce, because the data size and the problems you're solving back then warranted that kind of approach. On the other hand,
Right.
big data, there was, I think there's also a trend where people would spin up Hadoop and store small data in a big data stack. And it was really the question, well, could you just accomplish the same thing using like even a relational database? And I would argue that 9 times out of 10, you probably could actually. I don't know. So there, I think there was definitely like this, I don't know, sort of fascination with the technology versus actually just solving the problem. So
yeah, there's this like race to complexity. It was kind of a macho thing, like you were saying, pissing match. Like, what really complicated thing can we stand up, and what new open source tool can we build and deploy without a lot of focus on like what you're actually going to do with those tools, like what's your end deliverable for the business, how are you actually helping the business out. And now again, like you said, there's a lot of value just focusing on simple tools, and you can do that without really roadblocking yourself. You have access to a tremendous amount of computing power just using fairly simple off-the-shelf tools if you need it.
Oh yeah, and the same in data science too. I think during
Right.
when deep learning was starting to get popular, like there was, and I think kind of a similar contest was like, oh, how many layers, how many hidden layers can I put in my my model, right? And like how fancy can I tweak the hyperparameters and this model I'm building. And when you looked at the use case for some of the problems that are being solved, it was like, well, why don't you just use something like logistic regression instead of taking this, kind of novel approach. And even last night, I was talking with somebody about time series forecasting on a separate chat, and and it was kind of like, well, there's ARIMA models, and then there's like exponential smoothing. These are all like the classical stuff that's been around for decades, and then there's then sort of this newer approach of using machine learning. And then there's, when I talk to people that have been forecasting for a really, really long time, have been in the industry, it's like, I think the consensus is there's not really a huge advantage to using machine learning, and it just takes a ton longer to train these models. And with the classic techniques, you could just give it a data set and away you go. So,
well, it's funny, like I think about Facebook profit, and to me, for practical time series problems, I'm not talking like crazy theoretical PhD research, but I'm talking the kind of stuff that data scientists need to do day to day. Profit takes care of a lot of that stuff for you. And the point is that it takes care of multi-periodicity, right? Which is one of the standard features of any kind of real calendar time series data problem you're going to look at. Like you've got weekly periodicity, you've got holidays showing up year over year, you've got monthly periodicity, and out of the box, you can do that almost immediately and see all kinds of insights very quickly. And
yeah, for sure.
The point is that that's imposing a lot of domain expertise that the machine learning models may not actually have. Like it's hard to train them to think about multi-periodicity in that way.
Oh, it's really hard. Yeah, and if you take a regression approach, I mean, it's not the approach I'd advise, but some people do it, and whatever floats your boat, I guess. So
yeah.
But yeah, things like Profit, I loved when Profit came out. I fell in love with it immediately because it solved so many problems, especially forecasting in Python, which at the time they didn't really have a good forecasting package. Your best bet was go to R, but then you had to use the forecast package there. But then it was just a lot of rigmarole, and especially when you're dealing with lots of forecasts and you're trying to automate all those, it can be a bit unwieldy to try and do that manually. So Profit was amazing when that came out. I again, just give it data and do your thing. Like that seems to be the notion of a lot of the the simplified approaches. Really, like I think taking away a lot of the ceremony of more complicated approaches. Some people like ceremony. monks like ceremony, and that kind of stuff. It doesn't, doesn't mean in a business setting, you're getting paid, for all the ceremony. You're getting paid for the results. The faster you can get to results, I'd argue that's probably a better use of your time than, chanting incantations and whatever the equivalent is of like data scientists and data engineers do. It's just a lot of it's just a total waste of time. So
Yeah, and I think the point is that whether you're talking about software or data engineering specifically, the goal of any abstraction should be to make hard things easy, right? Like you don't want to think about the details of MapReduce, so just feed it to Snowflake or BigQuery. It will figure out the MapReduce for you behind the scenes, and you just declare what the logic is going to be in each step. Or that logistic regression will probably work reasonably well if you have the right data. And so just have a system that does logistic regression, and then you can worry about tuning that logistic regression. Or again, with Profit, I mean, the problem with doing all this stuff with by hand in R is that you had to worry about all those different periodicities instead of having a tool that just builds that in and takes care of it for you, so that you can think about at a higher level and solve harder problems by simplifying the base layer, essentially.
Yeah, and there's one stat too that, let me see, 750 million people use Excel. I just typed in number of people who use Excel worldwide. 750, like, take a step back and think about that for a second. That means that, you and I think have a perspective regarding cloud and data, but there is a much larger contingent of people who are just, crunching numbers using good old spreadsheets. And I would say that's probably the simplest approach. It also, I think, would come with some of the more dangerous complications if your spreadsheets aren't error-free. You see Excel bloat happening a lot and that kind of stuff. But it's, again, these are all simple approaches. And what's funny on LinkedIn is you're starting to see, I think, almost a reversion back where like things like Excel aren't, considered vile by data scientists. I think that, the spreadsheets, as far as I can tell, again, it's all anecdotal, but it seems to be gaining some acceptance, and I think rightfully so. I mean, I use spreadsheets all the time still. They're great. If you need to do quick calculations and a bunch of numbers, you could throw it into pandas or R, or you could just throw it into a spreadsheet like a normal person and just do it that way. So,
well, my argument would be that if you give me someone who's really competent in SQL, it's going to basically pre-process their data, do a lot of the logic up front, and then move it into Excel. At that point, Excel becomes a very nice exploratory tool. And then at some point, I may want to scale up and automate that process, and it should probably be moved back into SQL or some other statistical tool, maybe something like R. But the speed of Excel, if you're proficient at it, is hard to beat with one of these other more complex tools, because likely with pandas, it's just going to take you longer to find your way around.
I've seen data scientists do that. I mean, for the same task that you could do in Excel in about a minute, they'd fire up pandas, do all the import statements, read in the the CSV, do the pandas magic. And I guess, whatever, you're effective in, I suppose, but, from an outside perspective, for somebody who's also proficient in pandas and Excel, I would say, like, why don't you just use Excel? But what do I know? So,
I mean, I would say that as long as you're not confining yourself to Excel, if you can only do Excel, I would view that as a limitation. But to fire it up quickly and just do some exploration, it's a very quick way to find your way around.
Yeah, and there's another really popular post on just like no and low code tools, and that, I think that was an interesting one too. And I think the consensus really was, just try and remove as much undifferentiated heavy lifting as possible for the workflow. Like there's no glory in having to reinvent the wheel. It's the old saying that I always, we always talk about. It's like, the question I ask people when they want to take a high friction approach is like, well, for your car that you drive, I mean, do you just make your own car tires from scratch? Because that, I mean, you're kind of making the same argument. Or do you just go down to the tire store and go buy tires? The argument is I think very similar in this regard, where it's there's no sense in making your own wheels, I guess, or reinventing wheels when there's plenty of wheels at the store just down the street. So, and they know how to make those. That's what they do for a
Well, the
living.
point is, if your cognitive burden is trying to write some custom framework, then there are a lot of other high-level problems that you're not really thinking about. So you need to really decide what is my business as an individual contributor or a team lead? What is my business as a company? And focus on those things. And then the other stuff, like you're saying, outsource to Michelin to make the tires, or to some framework like, I don't know, Dataflow, or any number of other frameworks, depending on the application, and let
For
those
sure.
take care of a lot of those details for you. So
That's what we recommend our clients a lot too, is, I would say for most things that aren't core to what your company does, make sure you're using managed services for all the non-core stuff.
Yep.
It doesn't make any sense for you to spend time if somebody's already, if you have a team of people whose job it is literally to solve that problem, hire them and then use that tool, right? And then anything that is core to your business, absolutely focus dedicated resources on that. But
it needs to be unique, right? Like, don't just be refactoring an existing framework to be in a different language. Like, if there's an off-the-shelf tool that does the job, probably use that.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Cool. Well, let me get back to it. It's Monday. There's a lot to do. So, and I guess you got to go get your computer fixed. So.
Yeah, hopefully it's an easy fix. This is, it's this laptop shock, right? Because everyone knows, okay, all my stuff is backed up. It's fine, but when it actually dies, the slowdown you're dealing with is just horrendous. So I hope that they can just push some buttons and get it up and running in a couple minutes. So.
Yeah, well, hope your Monday gets better.
Yes,
soon. So
me too.
Awesome.
All right.
Well, have a good day, Matt.
Sounds good.
We'll talk to you later.
Take care.